You heard me right. Mikhail Gorbachev, the dictator who presided over the Soviet gulags that worked political prisoners to death, the dictator who oversaw the KGB's brutal suppression of democratic activists, the man who commanded the Soviet army, the man who dominated countries in Eastern Europe and imprisoned hundreds of millions of people in his own country. I'm talking about his citizens. Well, he's in Canada today. He's never been arrested or put on trial for his crimes against humanity. After the Second World War, we had the Nuremberg trials where Nazis were prosecuted for their butchery. The same thing for Saddam Hussein when he was captured, but not Gorbachev. He wasn't just the head of state for the Soviet Union for years. He was also the general secretary of their murderous Communist Party. For 30 full years, he was an integral part of one of the world's largest killing machines. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union has more blood on its hands than even Hitler's Nazi Party did. Only Mao's murder spree exceeds the Soviet Union's body count. Yet Mikhail Gorbachev has never stood trial for his crimes. Why is that? Is it because in the end, after a lifetime of being the enforcer, Gorbachev allowed the Berlin Wall to fall without sicking his tanks on the millions of Eastern Europeans who finally tasted freedom? But even if that's a whitewashed history, because between 1989 and 1991, when Gorbachev was allegedly promoting perestroika and glasnost, the Russian words for restructuring and openness, he was actually still ordering police to dissolve protests of real Democrats who didn't want him to be the dictator. He personally ordered police action against demonstrators that killed 100 people. That's just one small, specific example in his final months in office. So a man who presides over murder for decades is granted a get-out-of-jail-free card because on one occasion he didn't commit yet another mass murder. Gorbachev didn't just get off scot-free. He's treated as a hero. That's why he's being paraded through Vancouver today at a left-wing event called We Day as an example to school children. Hey, kids! Pay no attention to what this monster did from 1960 to 1990. Just pay attention to his little speech today. Now, I mention all of this because another former world leader, George W. Bush, will be in Canada next week, too. His name is Bush. You may know him as the liberator of Iraq and Afghanistan. To Amnesty International, he's a war criminal, seriously. Yesterday, Amnesty International demanded that the Canadian government arrest George W. Bush and charge him with war crimes. Now, it's not unusual to see some kook on the street corner calling for the arrest of Stephen Harper or the Queen of England or shouting out some other incoherent thing about how there's some global conspiracy, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you get those a lot. I mean, just this last month, some crackpot in Vancouver wanted to arrest Dick Cheney when he came to town to speak there. But really, it's in Vancouver. It's not particularly hard to get some hobo to say something nutty like that. But Amnesty International? Yeah. Here's Alex Neve, the boss of Amnesty International in Canada, making his announcement in Ottawa yesterday.
Under both international and national law, Canadian authorities must launch a criminal investigation against the former president, arrest him or otherwise secure his presence in Canada during that investigation, and commence a prosecution against him.
Got it. I mean, he's very serious. He's actually in Parliament there. Amnesty International has never tried to arrest Mahmoud Ahmadinejad of Iran or other brutal dictators. They've never tried to arrest the Chinese dictators responsible for Tiananmen Square. No moves against Bashar Assad from Syria. No moves against the royal family of Saudi Arabia. Now, there's a concept in law called sovereign immunity where you can't just arrest the leader of a foreign country. I mean, the whole theory of having a United Nations where every tin pot dictator gets to troll around New York City going to the finest restaurants and prostitutes in America is that in return we get to engage with the evil dictators. Fine. But how does that apply to Mikhail Gorbachev, who is an ex-dictator? He doesn't run anything now. He doesn't run anything other than his mouth. Now, I invited Alex Neve on the show today to explain this contradiction. He didn't accept. I phoned up Amnesty's spokesman, John Tackaberry, and I asked him. His first answer was to claim that there simply wasn't enough evidence to go after Gorbachev. That's what he actually said to me. He said that was why, but there were thousands of pages of evidence against George Bush, he said. No evidence against Gorbachev, no evidence of crimes in the former Soviet Union. Are you kidding me? Kidding me? Are you killing me? A dictatorship that killed millions and no evidence? That's what he said. Tackaberry asked me for examples of evidence. I gave him some. I didn't think I would have to. I pressed him. I talked to him about the gulags. When I asked him again, he suddenly said he had to go in a hurry, and he literally hung up the phone on me. Listen, it's not the first time that Amnesty International has sided with the world's butchers against the world's victims. Salman Rushdie, remember him? He's the novelist who wrote the Satanic Verses and was hit with a death threat fatwa by Iran's ayatollahs. I mean, he's no right-winger, let me tell you that. But he has condemned Amnesty International for siding with terrorists. When Amnesty sided with an al-Qaeda activist named Moazzam Beg, Rushdie said that Amnesty had done, quote, incalculable damage to their reputation. He's so right. He said Amnesty is, quote, suffering from a kind of moral bankruptcy and has lost the ability to distinguish right from wrong. He's so right. We've seen that moral inversion here at home. Also, remember earlier this year when our Canadian government released pictures of about 30 foreigners hiding in Canada, wanted by police for various crimes, including massacring civilians in third world countries? Remember, each of these men had already had a hearing. So these weren't baseless accusations or rumors. These men had had a hearing. Amnesty International weighed in then, too, on behalf of the foreign criminals and against the police. Can you believe it? A so-called human rights organization that cared more about torturers and murderers than about the people being tortured and murdered. Jason Kenney, the immigration minister who joined Amnesty International as a member back in high school, he just couldn't stand it any longer. Here's part of a letter that Kenney wrote to them. It's great. Let's take a look at it. He said, when I joined AI in high school, it was to defend the rights of political dissidents like Andrei Sakharov and to oppose brutal regimes, including those still doing bloody business in Iran and North Korea. I am disappointed to learn you are now squandering the moral authority accrued in those campaigns on targeting one of the most generous immigration systems in the world and protesting the actions of Canadian public servants applying rules and laws that far exceed our international obligations. Exactly right. Amnesty International rails against George Bush and Dick Cheney and our own Canadian government. But they give high fives to al-Qaeda terrorists and former Soviet dictators. I checked the Amnesty website today in Canada. They have more than 1,000 press releases or other calls to help convicted terrorist and murderer Omar Khadr. But not a word in defense of Khadr's victim, U.S. Army medic Christopher Speer. Here's a picture of Omar Khadr's little video clip now of Khadr building improvised explosive devices. That's the man that Amnesty wants to help. Here's one question IQ test for you. When Barack Obama is thrown out of office next year and he no longer has sovereign immunity, do you think Amnesty International will call for his arrest too? Because he's kept Guantanamo Bay open, you know. Remember when he said he'd close it? Here's a clip of him.
In order to effect the appropriate disposition of individuals currently detained by the Department of Defense at Guantanamo, and promptly to close the detention facility at Guantanamo consistent with the national security and foreign policy interests of the United States and the interests of justice, I hereby order. And we then provide the process whereby Guantanamo will be closed no later than 1 year from now.
Closed no later than 1 year from now. He said that in January of 2009. It was practically his first announcement. Well, it's been 3 years, and Guantanamo's still going strong. Hey, Amnesty, you going to go after him? No, because he's a leftist. So Amnesty doesn't care, just like they don't care about Gorbachev, the butcher. It's too bad, you know, because there's a lot of injustice and inhumanity in the world these days, a lot of torture and a lot of violence. We actually really do need a group that cares about human rights and freedom around the world. Unfortunately, Amnesty International just isn't one of them.